All right, thanks to everyone for those teach topics. Now let's turn here to the topic of the day, the industrialization of the United States. Things have been going on before the Civil War, but now we are up to the point where you're going to start seeing it happen, which you might call properly. The actual mass industrialization is going to be happening on multiple fronts: railroads, steel, and we'll get into all those. But this is a big important time for the U.S. here as we exit this, sort of self-made catastrophe in the 1860s, can move on from there, and people start to reinvest in the United States and try to build lives that previously have been broken. And so it's going to be a challenge, especially in an era when everybody remembers the Civil War. People's that builds people's outlook on the world, and so that will be a challenge going forward. And so hopefully we can touch on that a little bit more as the semester here rolls along. So the United States, as we are at this point where we've had a little bit of industrialization, and you had with railroads and all that, and then you had let's break in the middle there with the 1860s, and now you're past that and you can move on and create something new. And so really the United States is in a perfect spot to be able to make this happen between population growth and resources. It's just ready to go. And so that's what we're looking at here. So the first industrialization was in Great Britain. The people that are in the British class with me will know this well. And so that was sort of beginning mid 1700s, but definitely by the late 1700s, that is in full swing. And then by the time that the United States is in the Civil War, Britain is well on its way to being industrialized. So the U.S. and other countries are going to be catching up a bit, trying to make it happen, but also learning from what Britain has done well. And so that's what we will see here. The benefit for the United States is that it had abundant natural resources. One, it just had space. Europe had always struggled with having a proper amount of space for an increasing population. It's just a very old part of the world. People have lived there for a very long time, and so it just gets built up and built up and built up, so that vast amounts of land are just locked out. And now in the U.S., it's a pretty vast territory, obviously with Indian population, but there's territory to be exploited, and that's the situation that the United States is in here. The population, with post-war population tends to boom a bit, and despite the losses that the U.S. suffered population-wise, is going to be growing here. And they're starting to put in the machinery that's necessary to begin the process. So learning from the techniques of Britain, implementing steam on a large scale, and then the iron and steel innovations that had come about in the last 60 years or so, those are all going to be feeding into the U.S. So they're learning a lot from the industrialization that had been going on, especially in Britain, but other parts of the world. And so they're just pulling all that in. Anything that they can learn from, it's being implemented here very, very quickly. And the Fed and state are very much in the mode of incentivizing industrialization, getting factories built. They'll give tax breaks to people that want to build factories, or railroads. They give land and tax breaks and everything to railroads to make those happen, because it benefits the state in general. If you can have a railroad come right to a city or even a small town, all of a sudden that small town likely won't be a small town anymore. It'll grow quickly if it's a stop on a major railroad. And so lots and lots of efforts are happening in that area. This is a map here down in the corner. If we were in person in class, you wouldn't be able to see it as well, but here on the screen you should be able to. It's from 1870, and you'll see, the So that's just shortly there after the Civil War. And, the Northeast is fairly well, fairly dense in its railroads, just getting connected across the transcontinental, and then a little bit in the Southeast still. But you can imagine 1880, 1890, by 1900, this is just going to become more and more dense, especially in the Northeast. This density increases dramatically. And then you get all this other lines going out through the west, and then the one spidering off of that. The South is getting rebuilt, and so it will have lines as well. So a lot of that is happening. A lot of that with federal and state aid to make that happen and make it desirable for investment. And agriculture is going to play a major part of this, and that's one thing that people tend to forget about with industrialization, all that, is that the agriculture needs to be there to feed the people that aren't involved in agriculture. It's one of those you have to get the agriculture in place, and then you can have population growth, but you can also have people who are employed in factories rather than working the land. And so you're going to see a lot of efforts put into, especially as we get toward the end of the century, mechanization and improvements in the farming techniques especially in the Midwest, and the raising of cattle and all that. So the Midwest is going to be key for the this industrial boom, simply because they're going to be fueling it. That is not literally, but fueling the people that go to work in it. So milled corn and wheat are huge products for the Midwest. The meat industry is also going to be crucial. And it'll include the West as the century goes on, but especially at the beginning here, post-Civil War, the Midwest is a major supplier of various meat products. Pigs and cattle and others will be heading into those markets via railroads. We'll talk here in a second about Chicago, but all those railroads that are headed toward the Northeast especially are going to be going through Chicago. Chicago is going to be a major hub for the meat industry, and that's where you get things like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle talking about that. But the stockyards themselves are interesting to explore. And I want to mention that here. I'll pull that up right quick here. Yep. So this is a picture, of those stockyards. This sort of massive development effort. I believe it's just south of Chicago, if I remember the geography of where it is. But so if you look here on the right hand side of the image, you see all of the rail lines that are coming in and serving this one facility. And so they can go up and down. This was actually a partnership between 9 different rail lines, and they all kind of worked together to make it happen. And then this place, it made it easy for this location to connect to a bunch of other main lines that went through up through the Northeast and the rest of the country. It began just after the Civil War, and it really did become the sort of centralized meat processor for the agriculture of the Midwest. You would have trains come in. The stockyards would hold the cattle, especially, and other products, and they could either ship them on from there, or the cattle be processed over here at the various facilities for meat to go on to the other markets. So it's a really key hub. This was just what Chicago became known for a long time, much of the late 1800s. And so this is going to be fueling that industrial boom going forward. Here's another picture of it from looking at it over those large buildings they're on top up here. You're looking at it from the other side here. So you see the railroads on the back side of this here, and then all the stockyards there in the middle, holding pens, those sorts of things. I believe the far pink building, the one that's closest to us in this picture on the bottom, I believe that's the administration building, basically. really fascinating development that came out of this industrializing railroad era and post-Civil War era, when everything is just go, go, go. And obviously it didn't look like this right at the beginning. This would have been built out over time, but this is what it's becoming. And it was basically swampland. It was a sort of a development project that they were taking advantage of what was available to them and making something out of nothing in a lot of ways. And so all these railroads are going to be pushing into that Chicago region, which is right there at the bottom of the Great Lakes, and you can head on over to the northeast very easily, or down into the southeast if they want to. Mostly to the northeast, though. But now the whole of the U.S. is well connected, and that is going to be growing exponentially. And let me pause the video there. It has this has a 15-minute limit, and just so I can get into this oil properly in just a second. So we'll be right back.